The meeting invitation said, Cost Optimization Review, in the subject line. I should have known then. Instead, I walked into the conference room with my notebook and coffee, expecting another quarterly numbers discussion. Victor Lang did not wait for me to settle in. He slid a printed chart across the table and tapped one line with his pen. The kind of tap someone uses when they want you to understand the decision is already made. Your position, he said, is being eliminated effective today. The words came out so flat and without ceremony that it took me 2 seconds to process them. 8 years. 8 years of arriving early and leaving late. 8 years of keeping that production floor running without a single unplanned shutdown. 8 years of knowing every machine, every supplier contact, every technician on every shift. Reduced to a line on a cost chart. Then he said the part that dropped my stomach. It'll boost our quarterly profit margin enough to satisfy the board. Just like that, my 8 years of work had become a percentage point on a spreadsheet. The man who built his reputation on those numbers had decided the number looked better without me in it. He leaned back. The HR representative in the corner did not look up. The decision was ancient history before I had finished sitting down. I looked at the chart. I looked at the line with my salary on it. 8 years of invisible work. The systems I had built. The procedures I had written. The supplier relationships where contacts called me directly when something was going wrong before it went wrong officially. The calibration records on machines the maintenance manual had never been updated to reflect. None of that showed up on Victor's chart. On his chart, I was a number under operational overhead. I nodded once, not because I agreed, because arguing in that room, in that moment, with that man, would have accomplished nothing except making me look like I was begging. I was not going to beg. I'll need the afternoon to document a few open items, I said. Victor said that was fine. He did not ask what items. He did not ask because he believed the plant's systems were mature enough to run without whoever was watching them. He believed efficiency was a state you arrived at and then maintained automatically. He had never personally seen what it looked like when that belief was tested. That was about to change. Not today, not next week, but soon enough that the board would eventually be asking a very specific question about a very specific decision made in this conference room. I collected my notebook and left to start documenting. Before I tell you what happened in the weeks after, let me tell you who I am. My name is Charlotte Bennett. I have worked in manufacturing operations for 11 years, 8 of them at the same plant. I am not the kind of person who ends up in glossy corporate photos. I am the kind of person who walks the production floor at 6 in the morning to listen to how machines sound, because a machine that is beginning to fail sounds different from one that is running right. Catching that difference early is the difference between a scheduled repair and a full shutdown. My boss cut my position to boost quarterly profits. Weeks later, production suddenly stopped. Victor Lang had been director of operations for 14 months. In that time he had restructured 3 departments, cut 2 supplier contracts, and built a reporting framework that generated impressive dashboards while measuring almost none of the things that actually kept a production line healthy. He believed the plant ran on systems. He was not entirely wrong. What he did not understand was that systems require people who understand them from the inside. He had just removed the person who understood this one better than anyone else. And the plant was about to find out what that actually cost. 8 years earlier, I had walked into the plant for the first time as a junior operations analyst. The place was a mess in the way experienced people can see and new people cannot. On the surface things looked functional. Machines ran, orders shipped, numbers hit their targets most months. But underneath there was organized chaos, always one bad week from becoming something worse. Maintenance cycles had been set by people who no longer worked there, without accounting for how production volume had changed. Supplier deliveries were tracked on a shared spreadsheet that 3 departments updated independently, which meant the data was almost always wrong in 3 different ways. When something went wrong, people scrambled. My supervisor Helen pulled me aside during my second week and said something I never forgot. The goal isn't to fix things after they break, she told me. It's to know the system well enough to see the break coming first. Helen retired 2 years after I arrived. Before she left, she spent 6 weeks teaching me everything she knew, not just the written procedures but the much larger body of knowledge that had never been written down. I took notes. I asked questions, and I never stopped paying attention. By the time Helen's car left the parking lot for the last time, I was the only person who knew what she had known. The invisible work is the hardest work to explain to someone who has never done it. I started by mapping everything. Every machine, with its maintenance history, its known weak points, the output level at which it started to run warm. Every supplier, with their average lead times, delay patterns by season, and the specific contact who would answer the phone at 7 in the morning when something had gone sideways. Every technician, their areas of expertise, the problems each one handled best. Most of this information did not exist in any formal document. It had lived in Helen's head and before her in whoever taught Helen, passed forward through experience. I changed that. Over 2 years I built a documentation library capturing the real operational knowledge of the facility, not the procedures as written in official manuals, but the procedures as they needed to be performed given the specific quirks of our specific machines. Nobody asked me to do this. Nobody praised me for it. But after I did it, the plant stopped losing 2 or 3 days a year to preventable breakdowns. The executives noticed the improved numbers. They did not notice what had changed to produce them. That gap, between the credit and the cause, was the gap that would eventually matter enormously. Within 2 years of Helen's retirement, the plant was running differently. The maintenance cycles I had redesigned cut unplanned downtime by 60%. The supplier coordination system I had built, a tracking tool that flagged anything likely to run late, had nearly eliminated last-minute production scrambles. Schedules held, numbers improved. The way operations work is that when nothing goes wrong, nothing looks like work. The executives praised the plant's efficiency and attributed the improvements to general team quality and the new reporting structures. I was part of the team, so technically that was not wrong. But if you had asked any floor technician who had stabilized the production schedule, they would have given you one name. If you had asked any supplier contact who they called when something was running behind, same name. Nobody in the executive suite had asked those questions. They had never needed to, because the system was working. The problem with invisible work is that it remains invisible until it stops. And when it stops, the people who never saw it struggle to understand what they are looking at. Victor Lang had never seen it. He was about to get an education that would cost the plant more than $4 million and his career along with it. Victor arrived 14 months before he fired me, and I knew within the first week something was going to change. He was not a bad person. He was energetic, organized in the way spreadsheet thinkers are organized, and he genuinely believed the things he said about efficiency and strategic resource allocation. The problem was what he could and could not see. Victor could see numbers very well. He could look at a cost column and identify the largest items immediately. He could build a projection model that looked convincing in front of executives who did not know enough about operations to ask the right questions. What Victor could not see was the floor. Not literally, he walked the floor occasionally, always in clean shoes, always looking at a screen rather than the machines themselves. But he could not read what the floor told you if you watched it over time. He could not hear what I heard when Machine 3 in the East Bay started running its motor slightly louder on Thursday afternoons. He did not know these things existed. And because he did not know they existed, he did not know he was missing them. That is the most dangerous version of not knowing something, the kind where you are entirely unaware of the gap. The first real conflict came during his initial quarterly review. Victor pulled up a cost breakdown including preventative maintenance as a line item. He looked at the number, looked at me, and asked why we were running cycles at the current frequency. I explained. Machine wear accelerates non-linearly past certain thresholds. Our cycles were calibrated to catch wear patterns before failure probability increased sharply. The frequency looked expensive in isolation but was significantly cheaper than the alternative. Victor nodded the way people nod when they have already decided what they think. Seems conservative, he said. Could we extend the intervals and monitor? I said we could, but the monitoring would need to be intensive and specific to catch the problems our cycles were designed to prevent. What kind of monitoring? He asked. I described what I actually watched for. The sound changes, the temperature curves, the subtle output variations that preceded failures by days rather than hours. Victor looked at me with the expression of someone who did not want to admit they could not verify what they were being told. Let's put together a data-driven approach, he said. Meaning, he wanted a dashboard. I went back to my desk and started writing a report, because I could already see exactly where things were going. The report was 12 pages because the situation required 12 pages. The interdependencies between maintenance frequency, supplier delivery timing, and production resilience are not simple. Oversimplifying them produces plans that look efficient and fail in practice. I laid out 3 scenarios. The first maintained current practices. The second reduced maintenance frequency by 30%, with specific technical descriptions of what would happen at each machine. The third eliminated the operational monitoring role, my role, and described what production would look like without someone watching the leading indicators. Scenario 3 was not a recommendation. It was documentation of a risk. Victor skimmed it in my presence. I watched his eyes move the way they move when someone is reading fast enough to feel like they are reading without absorbing anything. Very thorough, he said. I want to focus on practical simplifications. He closed the folder. I saved a copy to my personal drive that evening. Not dramatically. Just the instinct of someone who has worked long enough to know that documented warnings matter more later than they seem to at the time. I also emailed a copy to the plant manager. The plant manager replied 2 days later, "Thanks, Charlotte. I'll flag this." The flag was never raised. I added the exchange to a document I had started keeping. The rumor about Victor's promotion campaign had been circulating for 3 months before he fired me. Dominic, a floor supervisor who had been at the plant longer than anyone, mentioned it casually while we reviewed next week's production schedule. Victor had been meeting privately with the VP of Manufacturing and had presented a cost reduction plan. I filed the information and kept working. But I watched Victor's decisions more carefully after that. A cost reduction plan gets built by finding categories where money is being spent that are difficult to defend in meetings full of people without operational context. Technical roles, maintenance budgets, line items that look expensive and whose value is hard to explain to someone who has never watched what happens when they disappear. My role was technical, held a significant salary, and did not translate easily into executive language. 3 other specialized roles disappeared before mine. A technician whose South Bay knowledge went back 15 years. A procurement coordinator who maintained 17 key supplier relationships. A quality control analyst who had designed our inspection sampling protocol. Each departure left a gap nobody in the executive suite could see. I wrote careful transition documentation for each departing colleague and delivered it to Victor's desk with a professional cover note. Victor sent 1 reply for all 3 packages combined. Thanks. We'll review. None of it was reviewed. The announcement to the department was brief. Victor gathered everyone in the main conference room on a Thursday afternoon. About 40 people, standing because there were not enough chairs. He explained that my position had been identified as redundant given the plant's current operational maturity. He used that phrase 3 times. He said the systems were solid, the team was strong, and the plant was entering a phase where senior technical oversight of this kind was no longer required at a dedicated full-time level. Nobody said anything. I was near the back wall. Dominic caught my eye. He did not speak, but his expression said what I already knew. Everyone on the floor understood exactly what this decision meant. None of them believed what Victor was saying. None of them felt it was safe to say so in that room. Victor thanked me publicly for my contributions. The way someone is thanked when being dismissed, warmly enough to be polite, briefly enough to be final. I nodded. I thanked him. I walked out with the same professionalism I had walked in with. I had 1 more week. And I intended to use every hour of it. I spent my last week creating the most comprehensive documentation package I had ever assembled. Every maintenance procedure currently running, with the reasoning behind each frequency and the specific warning signs it was designed to catch early. Every supplier relationship, with contact names, historical delay patterns, and an explanation of every flag I had built into the tracking system. Every machine on the floor, with current calibration settings, the tolerance ranges I monitored, and specific adjustments made in the past 18 months not reflected in manufacturer documentation. I organized everything into clearly labeled folders, wrote executive summaries for each section, printed a complete copy, and delivered it in a binder to Victor's office. He glanced at it, thanked me, and set it beside his computer monitor. I also sent digital copies to the plant manager, the floor supervisors, and the head of procurement, the people most likely to actually use the information, with brief professional cover notes. Nobody acknowledged receiving them. On my last day I returned my badge, walked out to the parking lot, and drove home. The next morning I did not set my alarm for 5:30 for the first time in 8 years. The system was now running on everything I had left behind. And what I had left behind had a shelf life. The first message arrived 12 days after I left. A text from Bryce, a floor technician who ran the overnight shift and was one of the people I trusted most. Supplier delay today on Type 2 aluminum stock. Schedule pushed 2 hours. Thought you'd want to know. He sent it out of habit, I think. Or because he was not sure who else would care about that information the way I had cared. I read it and sat with it. The Type 2 aluminum supplier had been running about a day behind their confirmed lead times for 6 weeks. I had been monitoring the pattern and had flagged it in the transition documentation. 2 hours was manageable, but the underlying trend, if nobody was watching it, would become something less manageable within 2 or 3 weeks. I texted Bryce, "Thanks. Make sure the scheduling team knows the adjustment." Then I sat with the knowledge that the scheduling team almost certainly did not have the full picture of why the delay was happening. Or that it was part of a pattern. Or what the pattern was likely to become. It was no longer my job to tell them. That was the hardest part of doing the right thing. The second message came 4 days later. An email from Paulo, account manager at one of our smaller suppliers, sent to my old work address and automatically forwarded to my personal account. He had apparently not been told about my departure and was reaching out about a change in delivery routing instructions from our procurement team that conflicted with the protocol we had established together. The protocol existed for a specific technical reason I had documented but which the procurement team had not read. I thought carefully about what to do. I forwarded his email to the plant's procurement coordinator with a brief professional note. Paulo was the contact for this account. His routing question related to a protocol described in the transition documentation I had provided before leaving. Factual. No editorializing. I did not call Paulo directly, even though I could have solved his problem in 30 seconds. Solving it directly would have prevented the plant from noticing there was a knowledge gap requiring someone actually employed there to fill it. The gap needed to stay visible. If I kept quietly patching things from outside, nothing would change until something too large to quietly patch came along. Something was already on its way. The third contact was harder. Ray, a maintenance technician who had worked the East Bay team for 4 years, called on a Tuesday evening. "Machine 3, he said. "Running warmer than usual the past 2 shifts." I sat up. Machine 3 had received a calibration adjustment 7 weeks before my termination because I had noticed it trending outside its optimal temperature range. The adjustment was not in the manufacturer's standard documentation. The reason for it was explained in detail in the transition materials I had given Victor. "Is it above the upper threshold?" I asked. "Not yet. Just trending." "Who's the duty supervisor tonight?" He gave me a name. I told him to let the supervisor know the trending needed to be logged and flagged for the next maintenance window, and that there was specific documentation about Machine 3 in the materials I had left before departing. Then I ended the call. I did not sleep well that night. I understood exactly what was happening. The system was running on what I had left behind. And what I had left behind was running out. Machine 3 was going to make that very clear, very soon. The first shutdown happened 22 days after my last day. The East Bay line stopped for just under 3 hours on a Thursday afternoon. Machine 3, as I had known it would be, but also Machine 7, which had a related issue documented in the same section of the transition materials. Victor described it in an internal email as a minor production disruption caused by scheduled equipment recalibration. Dominic forwarded me the email without comment. The email was not accurate. The recalibration had not been scheduled. It was performed as an emergency response after the line stopped. Calling it minor required ignoring the $400,000 in delayed orders that resulted from 3 hours of lost production. But Victor's approach had always been to frame surface information in language that made situations sound managed, and to trust that the people reading the email did not know enough to ask follow-up questions. For 2 more weeks, that approach held. The floor was running after a fashion. Victor's dashboard showed acceptable readings. Below the dashboard, the system was accumulating stress the way systems do when the people responsible for watching them do not know what to watch for. The technicians knew. The floor supervisors knew. But in Victor's reporting structure, the floor was a long way from the board. The pattern that developed over those 2 weeks was not dramatic from the outside. That is what people who have never worked in operations often misunderstand. Operational failures rarely arrive as one large visible event. They arrive as an accumulation of small misalignments that each seem individually manageable right up until they are not. The Type 2 aluminum supplier went from running 2 hours late to a full day late, compressing the production schedule in ways that increased pressure on machines already running warm. A calibration check on the West Bay line that should have been done at the 20-day mark was pushed to 30 because the maintenance team was stretched handling the East Bay, and nobody caught the miss because the oversight protocol I had maintained was no longer being maintained. Small things, each explainable individually, each the kind of thing a well-designed operational monitoring process catches before it compounds. There was no longer a well-designed operational monitoring process. There was Victor's dashboard, which showed green on most indicators because those indicators had been selected to measure things that were easy to measure rather than things that were operationally meaningful. The system was running. Underneath the running, it was coming apart. Week 5 was when it stopped pretending. The full production halt came on a Wednesday morning, 5 weeks and 2 days after I left. Dominic called that afternoon. Without preamble. The main line is down. Completely. I asked what had happened. He walked me through it. The aluminum delay had combined with the maintenance backlog to push 3 machines past their safe operating thresholds simultaneously. When machine 3 went hard offline, the failure mode I had described in writing 7 weeks before my termination, it triggered an automatic interlock in the transfer system, halting the entire connected production line. The safety interlock worked exactly as designed. The line stopped rather than allowing equipment damage to propagate. But nobody on the current team had known the interlock existed, because I had installed it and the documentation explaining it was in the binder sitting on Victor's desk. Trucks waited outside. Orders backed up. The financial impact would take days to fully calculate. I thanked Dominic. I wished him well. I said nothing else. There was nothing else to say. The machine had failed in exactly the way, at exactly the time, I had predicted in writing in documents sitting unread 2 miles away. Everything that needed to happen had happened. Now the investigation would begin. The investigation started within 24 hours of the halt. The VP of Manufacturing flew in from the regional office. An external consultant was brought in. The plant manager pulled 6 months of maintenance logs, supplier delivery records, and production schedule data. I was not involved. No access, no standing. But Dominic kept me updated in brief texts. What the investigators found, working backward through the records, was a sequence of interdependent failures, each tracing to a gap in operational knowledge. The maintenance cycle pushed past its safe limit. The supplier delay pattern that should have been escalated 2 weeks earlier. The calibration setting on machine 3 not reflected in the standard records. Then someone found the source documentation. The binder on Victor's desk. The digital copies sent to the floor supervisors. The email chains from my last week describing, in specific technical detail, each of the risks that had now materialized. All of it dated, all of it authored, all of it showing unmistakably that someone had seen this coming and communicated exactly what would happen if nothing was done. Dominic's text that evening was 4 words: "They found your reports." I set my phone down. Everything that needed to be said was already in those documents. I had written it all months ago. The documentation changed the nature of the investigation. What had started as an operational failure review became something different, not just what went wrong technically, but what decisions were made, by whom, and on what basis. My transition reports were entered into the formal record. The 12-page risk analysis I had written after Victor's first quarterly review was retrieved from the document server. My cover emails to the floor supervisors and plant manager. All time-stamped, all specific, all describing in advance the exact categories of failure that had now occurred, were added to the file. And then someone retrieved Victor's responses. His dismissals. The single-line acknowledgments arriving hours after detailed technical warnings. The meeting notes where he had described my preventative maintenance system as conservative and suggested reducing it. The picture that assembled from these documents was not complicated. A person who understood the system had identified the risks and documented them clearly. A person in authority had declined to engage with those warnings while eliminating the role responsible for producing them. Victor had reviewed the cost of my salary. He had not reviewed what that salary was actually covering. The board received an investigation summary within a week of the shutdown. It included my documentation. It included Victor's responses. The contrast required no interpretation. Victor's response to the board hearing was, from what I was told afterward, a study in watching a certain kind of confidence fail. He began with his usual framing: efficiency gains, system maturity, strategic resource optimization. He used the phrase, calculated risk tolerance, to describe the decision to eliminate my position. The board members had read the documentation. They had specific questions. When had he been made aware of the risk associated with Machine 3's calibration? What action had he taken after receiving the 12-page operational risk report? Why had the supplier escalation protocol described in my transition materials not been implemented? Victor did not have good answers. Not because the answers did not exist, they were in the documents. But engaging with those answers honestly would have required admitting that he had made decisions affecting the plant's stability based on incomplete understanding, and that he had been given the information to correct that understanding and had chosen not to engage with it. He tried to distribute responsibility across the team. The board was not interested in that. The board was interested in the fact that the halt had cost over $3 million, that the documentary record clearly showed it was foreseeable and avoidable, and that the person in authority had eliminated the role responsible for preventing it. Victor went very quiet in the second half of that meeting. The call from Hartfield Operations came on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after I left the plant. I recognized the company name immediately. A direct competitor in the same manufacturing segment, operating 3 facilities, known in the industry for taking operational quality seriously. The person calling was their director of operations, Anita Voss. She said she had become aware of my background through a mutual industry contact and had followed the situation at my former plant with professional interest. We spoke for 40 minutes. She described a senior operations role created as part of a Mid-Atlantic facility expansion, combining the technical oversight I had held with broader authority to design and implement systems across the whole facility. The compensation was structured around metrics reflecting actual operational outcomes rather than cost reduction percentages. She asked about my documentation practices. I described the procedures library I had built over 8 years. The calibration records. The supplier coordination system. The risk monitoring framework. She was quiet for a moment. When can you start? She asked. I said I was available immediately. We scheduled a formal interview for that Friday. Walking out of the plant 6 weeks earlier, I had not predicted this specific call. But I had known that the knowledge I had built over 8 years did not cease to have value because Victor had removed it from his cost chart. 6 months later, I am sitting in an office with a window looking out over a production floor I understand from the inside, not through dashboards and charts, but through the kind of attention that only comes from being present every day and caring about what you see. Victor resigned 8 weeks after the board hearing. The plant hired an interim consultant to manage the recovery, still ongoing the last time I spoke with Dominic. The full financial cost of the shutdown, delayed orders, emergency maintenance, consultant fees, exceeded $4 million. The annual cost of my salary was less than 1% of that. I am not telling this story for credit, and I am not pleased about what happened to the people working there who did nothing wrong. I am telling it because something in it deserves to be said plainly. The work that holds operations together does not show up on cost optimization charts. It happens before the problem, not after. It is the early warning. The calibration check. The supplier relationship maintained through years of small conversations. It is invisible precisely because it is working. The moment it stops, you do not find out immediately. You find out weeks later, when the main line halts and the trucks are waiting outside and someone has to explain to the board why the most important decisions were made by the person who understood the least. The documentation is already there. I want to be clear about what I did and did not do in the weeks between my last day and the shutdown. I did not sabotage anything. I did not break rules. I did not leak information to competitors or contact the board or take any action designed to accelerate or worsen the outcome. What I did was answer the messages that came to me with factual, professional responses. I forwarded emails to the correct current contacts. I told technicians to bring their concerns to their supervisors and to reference the documentation I had left. I did nothing that was not already my ordinary professional responsibility. And I stepped away from the things that were not my responsibility anymore. The problems I could have solved directly in 30 seconds, I left for the plant to solve. Not out of spite, because the plant needed to develop its own awareness of the gaps. If I kept quietly filling them from the outside, nobody would ever understand what had been lost. That was the hardest discipline of those weeks. Knowing what was happening, being able to prevent it, and choosing not to. Not because I wanted anyone to suffer, but because the only way for the truth to become visible was to stop obscuring it. The shutdown was not my fault. But it was not accidental either. It was the result of removing something essential and assuming the space would fill itself. The thing about operations work that most people never understand is the relationship between the visible and the invisible. Every good system looks automatic from the outside. The machines run. The parts arrive. The schedule holds. The dashboard shows green. An executive walking through can see the output without seeing any of the work that produces it. The calibration checks at 6 in the morning. The supplier call that reroutes a late shipment, the 15-minute conversation with a technician that prevents a 2-hour shutdown a week from Tuesday. When that work disappears, the output does not disappear immediately. The system runs on its stored momentum, on the documentation left behind, on the instincts of the experienced people still on the floor who are doing their best without the structural support they used to have. And then, one Wednesday, the momentum runs out. Victor thought eliminating my position was a smart financial decision. On paper, the day he made it, it looked exactly like one. The salary came off the books. The quarterly margin improved. The board saw what he wanted them to see. What he could not see, and what no dashboard was ever going to show him, was the thing my presence had been quietly preventing every single day. The most important work in any system is the work nobody notices until it stops. I knew that going in. He learned it on the way out.